welcome to Unpublished Opinions, a roundtable podcast by the Institute for Justice. We are recording this on Friday, October 4th, 2024. This is our first episode in a little while, since last June, and it is also our 8th episode. But most importantly, this is our first episode where we have stepped outside the cozy confines of the short circuit feed into our own feed. So this is, again, Unpublished Opinions. This is an Institute for Justice podcast. Our mother podcast is Short Circuit. And for our first few episodes, we kind of nestled under her wings, Short Circuit's wings. And so we would throw up an episode on the feed, and I would warn everybody. My name is Anthony Sanders, by the way, director of the Center for Judicial Engagement at the Institute for Justice. I would warn everybody, hey, this is not Short Circuit. So if that's what you want, cases from the Circuit Courts of Appeals, you can just skip this and go to the next one. And then we would do our Unpublished Opinions thing. But that was fun, and we got some good feedback. But after a while, we thought, deserves its own thing. So this is on its own feed. So you are listening to this. You must have found us through Apple or Spotify or whatever. Or you could have found us directly on our webpage, and we now have our separate webpage. You probably, therefore, if you are listening to this, saw our cool new design, our new logo on the IJ webpage, or probably is on the feed, but you should check it out if you haven't. It's a lovely little logo, Unpublished Opinions, with a coffee cup and a gavel that was designed by Laura Maurice Appel, one of our graphic designers at IJ. I think it really sets a nice tone for what this show is about, which is just talking about what's going on in the law, our thoughts about the law by Institute for Justice attorneys, but it's not about the Circuit Courts of Appeals, and it's not about our cases, which a couple other of our podcasts, such as Beyond the Brief, do. This is where we get into the weeds of legal stuff, and sometimes we disagree with each other, and you know what? That's okay. So it's not just me. There are other voices you are about to hear, despite listening to me for a little while now. But lastly, I want to say we haven't said in our previous episodes what our intro music is that you just listened to for a few bars. And that is one of the first recorded blues songs, Crazy Blues, by Mamie Smith, recorded in 1920. So we think it sets a nice tone for the podcast, but also it is in the public domain. So we can play it as much as we want, and no one can do anything about it, even though an algorithm said we were violating Sony's copyright. No, that copyright has expired. It is in the public domain, and we are just fine. And you know who else is in the public domain? My colleague Sam Gedge, who joins us today, IJ senior attorney. Also, I think in the public domain, maybe he's old enough, is John Wrench, who is our assistant director at the Center for Judicial Engagement. So both of you, welcome. And maybe we can start things off. What do you think about being in the public domain?
Well, thank you for having us, Anthony. It's a bold move to reintroduce this podcast to the world by throwing down the gauntlet to Sony, but I think we can take them. And yeah, I'll let John handle the actual question you asked, but thanks for having us.
Okay, you're welcome.
I think I probably am. Thank you for having me on, Anthony. I think I'm probably old enough for the public domain. I don't really have too many thoughts about that. But I agree that was a great way to relaunch the podcast, and I'm glad that we were able to include that song.
Yes,
it's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah, it's been fine the having it, but this one random algorithm was like, this is copyrighted, and we're like, no, it's not. I guess songs. So I know about public domain for books. They're bizarrely in the United States, because of all the history and Disney lobbying and all that, they go for 95 years now. So every January 1st, we get the next batch, or it's something like 95 years, right? It's like up to 1927 now or something. Mm-hmm. But songs are actually recorded songs are actually now starting to go in the public domain, but it's really old. It's like 1922 or something like that.
Yeah,
but if you get a recording that old, it's public domain.
Yeah, I've been really excited to see. I remember I think it was a few years ago that I think the Winnie the Pooh was up and like into the public domain, and it's a great moment to see the innovation, because I think one of the first things I saw was a Winnie the Pooh horror film trailer. So
yeah, I think that was released literally at midnight at New Year's when they were ready. It was blood and honey.
People were clamoring.
Yeah.
Yeah. This reminds me, there was this Eighth Circuit case. Sorry, I know we're not allowed to talk about circuit court decisions, Anthony, so I'll keep it brief.
Well, we'll get a
it was a copyright dispute. I think I'm probably misremembering all of it, but it involved these Wizard of Oz figurines, and they were whoever the movie producer of the Wizard of Oz movie was suing about these figurines, saying it was copyright infringement. And the whole fight was about whether the figurines, like the depiction of the characters in the figurines, was based on the book Wizard of Oz from like the 1890s, which would have been out of copyright, or whether they were based on the figures as depicted in the movie Wizard of Oz, which would have been within copyright. So check it out. Eighth Circuit, 2010, 2011.
Do you know who won?
I don't remember.
Okay, well,
I think like the front of the figurines might have been from the book and the back from the movie or something.
How can the back of the figure? Why?
Gotta check it out, Anthony, because I've already overstepped as much as I remember it.
All right, well, we'll leave that to fans of the Circuit Courts of Appeals. So we're talking about what to discuss today, and one issue that seemed to get Sam riled up a little bit is reading your sources, or how you cite, how much you need to read of something you cite, whether maybe in court or otherwise. So what's your thought on that, Sam?
My thoughts. I think we should be clear that like I was comparatively riled up about that compared to the other things on your list of topics. Like in the abstract, I don't care a ton about it. I'll be candid. But I can tell you kind of my take.
We're going to edit that part out, but okay.
Which is certainly when like I'm writing a brief, I will typically kind of print out in hard copy every case and statute that is cited in the brief, and not just kind of make sure that the quote is actually kind of like the words are right in the particular quote, but at least try to put eyes on the entire opinion. One, to make sure that I'm not citing like a dissent instead of a majority opinion, which is less of a concern now that Westlaw has kind of the color coding, although it's not perfect, Anthony, as you may know, it's not perfect. But also more fundamentally, just to make sure that we're not losing sight of the forest for the trees, right? You can all imagine these situations where you found this awesome pull quote from an opinion, and if you bother to read the rest of the opinion, you realize that the broader context might actually not be all that great for your position more broadly. I find that I tend to kind of skim over a lot of opinions when I'm just kind of on looking at the screen on Westlaw. So again, what I try to do is just print them all out in an enormous binder like a day or two before filing, and just kind of like sit in bed and kind of just try to get through them, or at my desk, depending on the time of day or night. So yeah, that's kind of my view on it. I'm not saying it's the right way or the wrong way, but it's probably the best way to do it.
I mean, that is almost the ideal way, but I'm guessing very few people will do that.
Yeah, John, how do you handle this?
I mean, I think that the evidence that people don't do it is that people regularly cite cases, and then you go and you read the case and you realize that they have done just what Sam said. They've cited a case that, even though there's a sentence that essentially says a string of words that they would like the case to say, the case actually stands for a totally different idea. It might not even be, like it might essentially be dicta. The case might be about something entirely different. And so I do think that reading every case to kind of get an idea of like, what is the story of each of these cases? And at the very least, what was the context of whatever's being quoted? And I don't think that a lot of attorneys always do that. I think it's more like a hunt and find something that It's like a ventriloquist dummy. Westlaw can be treated a little bit like a ventriloquist dummy, where you get it to say the things that you want it to say by finding little quotes here and there. And I think you can, if you're litigating against that, it's a great opportunity to go read the case and actually say that's not what that says. And it's so common for that what's quoted at you not to be what the case actually says.
It does seem, though, there's reading the case and making sure it's a majority and not a dissent, or it is in line with the rest of the holding of the opinion, right? But it's another thing to read, say, the entire fact section in another part of the case, which is maybe a totally different claim. And I mean, that seems like that would be quite a commitment and would cut down on other, responsibilities you have to your client to get the case ready.
Yeah, I think that's right, Anthony. And I guess I should be clear. Like when I say I put eyes on the opinion, like part of it is just like at least identifying that section 3C1 is about like preemption and has nothing to do with the equal protection thing that I care about. At least identifying and putting eyes on it and realizing, okay, like I have made the judgment that this part doesn't matter. And I think it also varies a bit on kind of what you're citing the case for, right? Like you always like kind of have the standard cite for what the standard of review is at the beginning of a brief. Like I will look at those ones, but I'm not going to fly spec those opinions word for word if it's just saying, summary judgment is reviewed de novo. But at least kind of force myself to at least make the judgment call that there's not something unhelpful about even that kind of mind run opinion.
Yeah, I think that's particularly helpful when the case, like let's say it's in a brief that your opposing counsel has filed and you're checking it. I think it's particularly important to read the whole opinion, at least to get an idea of what the opinion is about, when what's being cited or quoted to you is its own analysis of what the case says. And it's not just a quote of, like this is the standard of review or this is the test that's in quotations. But if someone is saying this is what this case said and includes some quotes here and there, I think that almost always raises a red flag that someone might be either exaggerating what happened in the case or finding a little bit of language and piecing a bunch of things together that aren't actually there.
Yeah, well, one of the particular kind of like landmines, which I'm sure you're a huge fan of, Anthony, is the 19th century opinions, where there was, as you know, I'm sure the practice not of just having like the opinion, but also before it, like having page after page, just like reciting the arguments of the various parties. And at least on Westlaw, it doesn't do, if you're just skimming it, right, it doesn't do a great job of distinguishing what's just basically a copy paste of a party's brief versus, Chief Justice Marshall's take. Obviously, courts today care more about what Chief Justice Marshall said about it than what like one of the lawyers did. So that's certainly kind of a rake that can easily be stepped on if you're not careful.
Yeah, I think, and probably all of us in some way who have dealt with that older kind of case law have in some small ways stepped on that rake because it's so easy to do. I think a lot of it is just how reporters put together cases back then, because it wasn't like today where for short circuit the court issues a 20-page PDF and that's your opinion. It was the court recited it from the bench, the reporter's there, puts it together, puts some head notes in, puts the counsel's argument there if he's being adventurous, and then you read it and you're like, what the heck is even the words of the, sometimes it's hard to tell what's even the words of the court because there'll be head notes and you're like, is this the reporter's summary? Is it the court summary? Some states, have head notes that are quote law, and some just include them,
West Virginia.
For help.
West Virginia is one good example of
it's
that.
Actually law in West Virginia.
As much law as the opinion, I believe so.
Yeah. And U.S. Supreme Court, it's the opposite. So I guess a lot of it just has to do with technology has changed. And one thing I was going back a minute, one thing I was going to say is I think attorneys who are really cutting maybe at a little fast and loose in this area, they go for the head note. And so if the head note says a point of law, okay, put it in there. But that's just some dude at West who, late at night was putting together the head notes, and it could have been the opposite of the holding, but yes, that sentence is in there about, or it could have had nothing to do with what the court eventually decided.
Yeah, I've always been. If you ever have guests on this show, Anthony, who are not IJ lawyers, I would suggest that you could bring on just someone from Westlaw who does this, because I always wonder, like, just how do you even do that? You get so many opinions from so many courts every day, and it's so, like, I guess someone's reading them and identifying.
Yeah,
just I don't know. It's just crazy.
So I do live in the great state of Minnesota, where Westlaw is headquartered, and so I have met people over the years. In fact, some people I went to law school with have worked there and done some of that work, and it is very much, what you would think. Like, you got so many to get done, and you turn and get them out, and I'm sure there's skills that they develop, but that's an idea. Yeah, that's an idea for a future podcast. One other thing about this area, though, I'd like to, because this, I think what you've been saying, but both of you guys have been saying, where you're practicing, you have candor to the court, you have responsibility to your client, and also the other side, I mean, it's the easiest, like, booby trap, right? Is to do what we just been talking about, and the other side can come after you for it. So it's kind of self-reinforcing. What about, like, just scholarship, though? So you're writing an article, maybe it's for a law review, maybe it's for a bar journal, maybe it's an op-ed, and you quote something, and, like, you quote a line in a book. No one expects you to read that entire book to get, I mean, it's fraught with peril, sure, but you kind of get a sense of what the book is about. But I have gotten a sense that some people think there's something wrong, if you don't read the book you're citing. I just think that's insane. Am I overstating things?
I mean, I feel like there's maybe a difference between, like, what's prudential here, like what's prudent here, and what's ethical. Because I don't think it's unethical to cite something in a book without reading the book. But I could imagine a situation where someone has not read, like, someone is citing something in a book, and maybe later in that very same book, what's being cited is actually the target, like the conclusion of, like, this whole idea is wrong. So, like, I don't know. I guess it would be wise maybe to at least get an idea of, like, the arc of the book and what its conclusions are and things like that. But I don't think it's certainly not, like, an ethical requirement. And I think the same goes for law review articles, that it's good to know what the point of the law review article is, what the conclusions of its sections are. I think it's good to go check the sources that are cited in law review articles, but I'm not practically, I don't think people usually do that before they cite them. I think that it's a good thing to do, and it's a prudent thing to do, or else, like, how many, this would be a great thought experiment if you wrote a law review article that sprinkled throughout it were 5 or 6 just totally made up citations that said things that were very, very useful. And I have a feeling that you could probably get some mileage out of them. People would cite them, would never check to see if they were real, and then would just kind of copy your citation.
Given how, that could happen. I mean, one check, ironically, from what we were just talking about, is that on Westlaw, there would be no link to that source, because it would be made up. So you'd be like, hey, why isn't that blue? I wonder if there's something going on here. But I bet you don't. Well, so the reason why you wouldn't get away with that, right, is because of the student checking system.
Yeah.
You good little worker bees, some of whom may be listening. Thank you guys for all the toil that you put in those journals, because it does save, malfeasance like what John is proposing here. Although it would be interesting to try that.
Yeah, I'm sure no one would ever make that mistake of letting one of those slip through.
I bet ChatGPT could give you some good sources, though.
Yeah,
like it has for these attorneys who've accidentally cited non-existent cases.
I've been experimenting with, like, I don't know if it's ChatGPT or some AI, not actually for work, but for just the general non-law related history stuff that I find super interesting in my off time. And I asked it, like, what year was Claude Debussy's La Mer first performed live in Italy, which you think would have like a objectively right answer, and the thing kept on giving me different answers, ranging from like 1906 to 1920, and I still don't know what the answer is. Anthony.
Well, the thing is, if it's a model like ChatGPT, it's not trying to give you facts. It's trying to give you what's the most common words that would answer that question.
That might be right.
Right.
Might be right.
But there are more fact-based ones that we had a short circuit episode with Ed Walters of VLEX that knows all this stuff. People want to check it out earlier this year, but you need to make sure you're in the right AI, I guess I'm saying it. And apparently this one is not the right one, or at least not the right one for WC.
Perhaps not. Yeah. I mean, I was mainly kind of hoping that it would kind of set me on the right track for real life sources that might have the answer, but it didn't. And then I just gave up. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But no, I kind of agree with John on the book thing. I feel like there have been times when like a book length source has been so kind of useful and kind of central to something I'm working on that I do read it all. I'm not typically reading it because I feel like I need to check that box in order to cite it. It's because like I actually am trying to learn about the subject matter. But I think it's a different analysis when there's kind of like just a basic fact that you're confident is true, and there are sources that that stand for that proposition.
That's right? Like the equivalent of what is the standard of review for summary judgment in this jurisdiction, and you probably don't need to read that entire case.
Right.
Yeah. So we're talking about pleading. One thing I have been confused about in recent years, actually for a very long time, is pleading causes of action. So this is really getting us in the weeds. Listeners, if you made it this far, you like weeds. So we're diving in. They're like at least waist high at this point. And so this is what I don't understand. So pleading causes of action. When I have written complaints in my life, so you file in court, and then the way you do a complaint, I know you don't have to, but the way most people do is you have count 1, breach of contract, count 2, intentional interference with emotional distress, or whatever your counts are. In constitutional cases, we have these constitutional counts, due process, equal protection. So you do that, but then people will plead them. I've seen lawyers plead them where they'll plead the counts will be remedies. So they'll have count 1, breach of contract, count 2, declaratory judgment. Declaratory judgment is the relief you're asking for, which would be at the decretal stage, right? Sam, am I getting the words right? Or
I love the word decretal.
Yeah. Or is that what the court does? Anyway, you're asking for the relief at the end. Given the above, we beseech ye, O court, to give us blah, 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 including a declaratory judgment. But they put it in the count. So what is the difference? What's going on there? What am I missing? Is there a right answer? Is it all just under Rule 8, you can do whatever you want, supposedly?
Yeah, I mean, so back to my earlier point, I think this was the topic on the list that I had the least views about.
You had least views, but then you wrote all these notes, which made me think you actually have a burning.
No, I wasn't playing coy. This one I haven't given a ton of thought about. So, John, why don't you give Anthony the answer, and I'll try to think of something intelligent to say while you do that.
I mean, I'll give you something. I could give you something that's like so incredibly wrong that at least you have something to work off of.
Great.
No, I think it is strange, like you were saying, Anthony. You're pleading the facts. To make the point to the court why you are entitled to relief. And that's what the count is. It's confused. I don't know why you would plead the relief, right? Like you're pleading the violation. You're pleading why you are entitled to relief. So it just seems strange to organize it around what specific relief you're entitled to. It's just also strange practically because you're not going to be litigating against the other party about, at least not at that first stage, about what kind of relief you're entitled to. You're probably going to be litigating about whether you've pled a cause of action. And
right. Which raises the question as to what is a cause of action. Is a declaratory judgment a cause of action? I don't think it is.
I don't think it is. I mean, maybe maybe there is some technical definition that I'm unaware of, but my understanding of a cause of action is it's your basis for why you are entitled to relief. It's not what form of relief you are entitled to.
I mean, the cause of action is whatever the law is that would give you a declaratory judgment. So, I mean, it's a thin line, but in some ways, I guess you could say it's a cause of action. Like the Declaratory Judgment Act is a cause of action.
Yeah, I just don't know why someone would ever organize the complaint around, like, essentially phrases as if it's around the relief and not the actual claim.
But Sam, you suggested it just doesn't matter.
I mean, I don't know if it matters. I mean, I think one useful data point on this is to see how courts talk about like pro se complaints, right? Where obviously you like construe them more liberally, but typically not that much more liberally. And there you have courts all the time saying, you don't even need to include, the remedies you're seeking in a complaint. And that's largely true under like Rule 54C, I think, or 54D in the federal rules. And they say you don't even need to plead a cause of action. You don't need to plead a theory. All you have to do is set forth the facts giving rise to some basis for relief. Now, obviously, I think like many lawyers probably their yardstick wouldn't be, am I writing a complaint that is as good as something a pro se person would file? But it does kind of suggest that that I at least kind of find it kind of confusing. But speaking of causes of action, I know that John Wrench has some stories about special masters. I'm trying your segue, Anthony. You said that we could segue if we don't care about one of these topics. But if you guys want to talk more about causes of action, I can just kind of sit this one out.
Sam is trying to get us out of the weeds and into the swamp.
Okay, well, we can do swamp.
That's a great
we can
segue.
circle back if we have special views, but I do want to hear this special master thing because my thought is special masters, at least at the U.S. Supreme Court, are a dodge and are cowardly. But convince me otherwise.
Okay, well, I don't have any agenda here. So I don't know. I mean, maybe the facts will convince you. So I was looking into special masters because I don't know anything about special masters because, why would I? It's just such a niche thing.
You're not a riparian lawyer, John. You have
right.
interest in riparian rights.
I actually am kind of interested. I wrote when I was in law school, I wrote an article that had so it was about space law and it touched on riparian rights. So
are you auditioning for the next special master spot?
No, I'm auditioning for the Space Force.
Oh.
How are there rivers in space?
There's not rivers, but we'll put a pin in this, but although there are no rivers, I mean, maybe there are. There's probably rivers somewhere.
Well, there's rivers on other planets, but
there's
not
rivers on
in
other planets.
Space.
So the reason that riparian rights got roped into this was there's this. We'll get back to special masters eventually.
I hope so.
The reason I got into it is there is something called the Outer Space Treaty. And there's this principle in the Outer Space Treaty, which was essentially designed to prevent like space war between the U.S. and Soviet Union. And there's this principle called the non-appropriation principle. And what it says is that no sovereign nation can appropriate land in space. And so as this interest in space mining has developed, the question is extracting resources appropriating land, or is it something else? And so water rights has something to do with that, because in the West, water rights, you don't have to own the land and you can extract, and those are different concepts. And so that's how we got to space law, but that was quite a detour. From special master.
I want to know more about that.
Okay,
that sounds pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, you could have a special master. If two states were suing each other over the moon.
Oh yeah,
then
it'll happen.
It goes to the Supreme Court.
It'll happen, and they'll have to cite my law review article because what else are they going to cite? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I was looking into the special master thing because it's kind of strange, and so you have like this category of cases, right, where the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction, where they're essentially a trial court, right? Like there is no trial court below them. And that's kind of strange for a court that is organized to be a 9-member appellate court, at least at this point. It's a 9-member appellate court. And so for them to be also a trial court, that's very strange. And there's a category of cases where they have original jurisdiction. But at this point, I think the only one where they still have exclusive original jurisdiction is state versus state. Because the other categories, I think the district courts also have concurrent jurisdiction over at this point.
Oh, I've always wondered that because it says, so I'm bringing up Article 3 here with the grants of jurisdiction. And it's in all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. But you're saying, and I should probably remember this from law school, but you're saying that by statute, those public ministers, consuls, and ambassadors, they're all shuffled up to the district courts?
Yeah, they have concurrent jurisdiction now, so it's not exclusive. So the Supreme Court still has original jurisdiction. It's just not exclusive.
And so it never actually, as a practical matter, I'm guessing it never chooses to have it.
Right. Practically, that means that the Supreme Court is actually going to be exercising original jurisdiction in state versus state,
I see.
State's party dispute. So that's interesting. I didn't know that before, that it's actually been whittled down quite a bit. And then if you're trying to get the court to exercise its original jurisdiction as a state, you file, you move for leave to file your complaint, which would trigger the action, and then the court decides whether to take it or not. And that's just at the start. We haven't even gotten to special masters, and that's an interesting question because I think it's a majority of the court has to vote to take it, which is different than
right. And then right now, Thomas and Alito think they have to take these.
Yeah.
And so they vote against the initial denial if they not, but on that grounds, basically.
Right. And I think that's actually been a dispute for quite a while about what discretion does the court actually have to deny original jurisdiction. It is a pretty interesting question because there's a couple of cases in history, and I can't remember the names of them now, where the court just said, no, I don't think so. And there's nowhere else to file. Right. That's it. The case is just over because the court didn't want to take it. I think one of them was a contract dispute. I'm sure someone somewhere knows a lot about this case. It was like a contract dispute about football games being played. And it was between two states. And the court, I think, was just like, this is not what we exist for. So one of the interesting things that I was reading about with special masters is there's like a proto special master, and there were commissioners. And the first time that the court actually uses, they appoint a commissioner in a case invoking their original jurisdiction is actually the first original jurisdiction case ever, which is a case called Van Staphorst versus Maryland. And it was docketed in 1791. And it's interesting because it kind of shows why you might want a special master in the first place. I know that, Anthony, you said that the description of what was it? Cowardly and a dodge, I think was the...
Well, I'd see. Yeah. If you're a court and doing original jurisdiction, you should be a court fact finding, maybe get a jury.
Right.
That was a question I have. Has the Supreme Court ever had a jury?
They have. I think that they have impaneled a jury. I think I read twice. I think that they've impaneled a jury, but I think it's been a long time.
Yeah, sure.
So this case, Van Staphorst versus Maryland, it was a Maryland merchant named Matthew Ridley. He goes to Europe to try and get a loan on behalf of Maryland to help them in the war effort. And he finds two Dutch guys who are willing to give him the loan. They're called the Van Staphorst brothers.
It's very Game of Thrones kind of.
It's pretty great.
Go to Amsterdam to get money.
Yeah, and he did. So he went to Amsterdam. He finds two Dutch guys. Right. The what is it? The Iron Bank.
Right. Which is obviously in Amsterdam.
Right. Yeah. So they're sympathetic to the American Revolution. They're also sympathetic to they like the agreement, which would be that interest is paid in tobacco, which I think is a great part of this. So add to Game of Thrones, right? So he gets the loan. He goes back to Maryland, and they aren't really worried about the British anymore. The timing just worked out, so they probably don't really need the loan. They don't like the terms of the agreement anymore, and Maryland just doesn't uphold its side of the bargain. So those brothers, they essentially issue a summons to the governor of Maryland and the council. So that invokes the court's original jurisdiction, and the court is trying to get witnesses to testify. Like, they're trying to get evidence about the case, trying to figure out what's going on, but everybody's in Amsterdam, so they can't actually get a hold of these people. And so they make a list of commissioners. They appoint these commissioners, and they give them the ability to issue subpoenas and go interview people and gather testimony in Amsterdam. And those commissioners, which the court will then do over the next 100 years or so again, it seems like initially it was just like a practical issue that, like, the members of the court cannot go out and gather this information in Amsterdam and put together these reports and do all this stuff.
But I mean, they shouldn't have to, right? That's the lawyer's job.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could have done that. I'm not sure why in this case they didn't just send the Maryland attorneys to go and do this. They actually compiled the list of commissioners based on the Maryland attorney's suggestions.
But it also seems like the difficulties that the court would have faced there were not unique to the fact that it was the Supreme Court exercising original jurisdiction. Like, the District of Maryland would have faced the same problems, you would imagine, right? Like, it's not like some judge there is going to go over to the Netherlands or whatever. British Belgium? I always get kind of confused about what countries are whatever there. But
yeah, we can just... the Dutch.
Yeah, Luxembourg. But Anthony, it sounds like you have some strong views on this.
No, I mean, I get that. I guess we'll say it was the court's responsibility. I mean, that's a pretty extreme case. Plus, it's 1791. I mean, what do you do in 1791 to take a deposition of someone in Amsterdam for a U.S. case? Like you would today, open a docket in the foreign jurisdiction, and God knows. But later, when you have these disputes between states or whatever, I'm just why don't the attorneys just put on the evidence in court? And is it because they're just always so complicated because they have to do with like rivers and 17 treaties from the last 200 years and whatever?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's going on, at least based on what I read, that these like early commissioner cases set a bit of a precedent where the court just realized it was much easier to kind of delegate this out. And I think delegation is actually the word that I kept thinking of as I was reading these. Is it raises a pretty interesting issue once you get to this consistent use of the special masters, that the court, it has a mysterious process for picking special masters. It had where are the rules for picking special masters? And so I was reading this law review article where this person was talking about the special masters. They've come from, some law school deans and professors, people who used to work in the Supreme Court justices' old firms. Sometimes it was retired judges, but retired judges are actually apparently that there's a trend down just because they've been used for other things. Senior judges have been used for other things. So it's a mysterious process how they're picked. It's a mysterious process for what happens when some justices don't agree with who's been picked. It's a mysterious process for what their mandate is to do and what the bounds of that are. And then I think one of the strangest things is, especially right now where there's concerns about non-Article 3 actors making decisions. I mean, what are special masters? They don't exactly fit into this category. So the court, it just seems like the court has this area where it's been delegated this authority, or it's been given this authority constitutionally and it's not really clear how that shakes out. And so it's just made a bunch of ad hoc rules for how these original jurisdiction cases are going to work. And I could imagine being a party to that and feeling like maybe this is a little too of like a liminal space. But yeah, so I don't know if I think it's a total dodge. I think it's understandable how it came about. I think the court could impanel juries. I think that would be really fun. I think it would be fun to see 9 justices making evidentiary rulings. It would be hard. It would be difficult. So I think this is all at the end of the day, just practically the court is an appellate court, and I don't think they want to or know exactly how they would handle a lot of these as like a trial court.
I do wonder how many of the current original jurisdiction cases would even be jury eligible, because I don't know, but I imagine that the kind of the mine run dispute about rivers is probably one that sounds in equity rather than at law, but maybe not. I'm not a riparian lawyer like you, John. So I don't know.
I'm more of a space lawyer.
Space lawyer. Sorry. Didn't mean to insult your area of expertise. No, but one thing that this kind of got me thinking about is how rare it is. Maybe we talked about this before. I can't remember. How rare it is for appellate judges to sit by designation as trial judges. Did we talk about this? Does that ring any bells? Maybe not.
Maybe it was an unrecorded conversation.
Just talking as humans do. But I think it's incredibly refreshing and rare. I know Judge Bibas on the Third Circuit, I believe, has sat as a trial judge. I believe Judge Posner did at least once. And it seems like it doesn't happen very often. And I feel like there's would be a lot of value to the decisional process if you have appellate judges kind of get in the trenches and actually experience what it's like for trial judges, at least a little bit, kind of get a flavor for that. And it just doesn't seem to really appeal to a lot of appeals court judges. Maybe because it's, if you sit by designation on another circuit, it's a very kind of defined time commitment, right? Like there was 1 day of hearings and then you get your assignment for 2 cases and okay, you can plan for that. If you're sitting by designation on a particular trial, like it can drag on for years and who knows what the time commitments are. But it seems like there would be some value to more folks on the appeals courts doing that potentially. And that kind of goes to the, Anthony's suggestion that the Supreme Court is just engaging in cowardly dodges by not, actually overseeing the fact finding in these original jurisdiction cases.
Well, I think that would be maybe a good practice for more appellate judges, including maybe SCOTUS judges. You're right, it would be a little awkward, but my thought about the cowardliness of the special master is less that a special master can be a good idea, because it is, special master, to be clear, is used in other courts. It's used in a lot of trial courts usually it seems like it's like complex property disputes where the special master is appointed, goes out, does this evidentiary stuff that the court wants to know, and then comes back, and then, each side can object to that and build their own record, which can happen. I think it always happens actually at the Supreme Court too. Like, right, they object to the special master's findings, and then that itself goes to the court. So it's not inherently wrong. It's just every single time one of these disputes goes to the Supreme Court, it gets a special master. That is not true in trial court, and it's basically someone rid me of this. I'm getting the Thomas Becket line.
Troublesome facts.
Troublesome facts, exactly. That they don't want these original jurisdiction cases, and so this is how they get rid of them. And maybe these cases aren't, or these states who are parties aren't like denied their due process rights because of that, but kind of raises a red flag in that way that 100% of the time that's how the court adjudicates these.
Yeah, I wonder if states do have due process rights, Anthony. I guess that's a question for another podcast.
I meant a big picture due process rights.
Yeah. One thing that Sam said is that I thought was kind of interesting is the fact that you don't have appellate judges really doing trial work. And I think that's that's like a trend, not only like on their way up to becoming an appellate judge, but also like once you're an appellate judge, you're probably not going to be doing any trial work. And it's just kind of strange to reflect historically on judges probably, at least for most of history, had a little bit more of a wholesome picture of what the law looks like, right? Like it would have been strange, like Cook, for example, like knew how trials worked, right? Like it would have been very strange for someone to be at kind of at the highest levels of dealing with the highest levels of abstraction without having first done a lot of trial work. And it is kind of strange that it feels like, at least in the federal courts, that being an appellate judge, being a judge in an appellate court, it's like you get to live in this world of this higher world of ideas, and it's where you would prefer to be. And then there's the trenches down where there's just a bunch of factual disputes. And I feel like that's a really unfortunate dichotomy, because trial work is just as much part of how law, like where the rubber meets the road on law happening. It's probably more so. And it is a shame. I wish that there was more of a wholesome experience, in the same way that it would be great if you had more judges who were kind of from different areas of the legal profession, whether that's defense work or public interest. Maybe more public interest attorneys. It'd be better if there were more of that. Things like that.
Well, we're not going to disagree with that. One other issue before we get to a closing segment. One other issue that Sam wanted to raise is name dropping of judges.
I forgot about that.
Now, you said in opinions. I'm wondering also in like briefs and citations. So what's your thought there?
So I don't actually have thoughts, but it seems like there is some tension simmering beneath the surface on a lot of this. And I was listening, this was probably a year or so ago. I was listening to a bunch of Seventh Circuit arguments while I was driving back and forth to work. And I ran across a few where you would have an advocate talking about a Seventh Circuit decision, and they would say the name of the judge who wrote it. Like, I don't know, Judge Rovner said in whatever, and they'd get cut off by a judge on one of the panels. I don't think it was specific to any particular judge, but it has happened a couple of times, I noticed, basically saying the opinions are for the court. We don't want to hear you tell us the name of the authoring judge, because that suggests, I guess, that it's that judge's work when it really is the work of the institution. And I think there's actually like some that's not an unreasonable perspective, but it seems to be in some tension with how at least some other judges view things, the tension I think is spotlighted most clearly in some of the opinions written for the Supreme Court by Justice Kavanaugh, because at least for a while, Justice Kavanaugh was really name-dropping individual authoring circuit court judges in his opinions. I think the TransUnion case, the standing case from a few years ago, like he was like every paragraph he's saying, Judge Colleton for the Eighth Circuit said X, and Judge so-and-so on the DC Circuit, clearly doing the kind of thing where if he were an advocate in at least some circuit courts, he'd be getting kind of raked over the coals for not kind of basically honoring the institutional nature of the writing. And so I don't really know. It just seems like there seems to be very different perspectives by different members of the bench on kind of what you do, like whether it's, appropriate to identify the authoring judge under what circumstances. And I don't really have really a strong instinct on it. Obviously there are times you see in briefs where like, well-respected circuit judges typically kind of get the little like parentheses name drop at the end. I don't really know when you go about how you make the call about, okay, when's a judge cool enough that he gets the name drop or she gets the name drop. Yeah, I don't know. Like on the one hand, I take the Seventh Circuit's point. On the other hand, I guess it's information. Like it's, I guess, potentially a relevant data point so I don't know is my take.
Yeah. When do you go underneath their robes? Maybe be one way to put this.
That would be a more controversial way of posing the question, Anthony.
Yeah.
Yes.
To steal the David Latt's old blog name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because I agree that there's I think when I see it in Supreme Court decisions, it's almost always, unless it's a justice who just wants to give the nod to someone who they think is one of these well-respected judges, and they want to point out that, like, obviously this must be a pretty good opinion because it's a judge that we all love and respect.
Yeah, like Justice Marshall, Chief Justice Marshall, he gets name dropped all the time, right?
That's true.
I think a living judge who I see like very often in this is probably Judge Sutton. And I think that this is like, who was it? I think it might have been Justice Kagan said in an oral argument. She slipped and said, I think she said Justice Sutton. But it often also seems in Supreme Court opinions like it is just it's a weapon, like it's a rhetorical weapon to be able to say, like if you're writing a dissenting opinion, it's so useful to be able to basically count up the members of the majority, cite things that they have said in opinions authored by them, and basically point out every person in the majority has said the opposite of this in one of their own opinions. And that seems like the kind of thing I think that is persuasive. Like I think that is a good use of name dropping by another justice. But as an advocate, I think you're always kind of on rocky ground there. I mean, you have to know your audience. If you have a panel who maybe really likes the judge who they vote with them all the time or something, maybe that's a judgment call. But I wouldn't be surprised if the court doesn't like that a judge is being quoted at them.
Well, I wonder if it's more a thing if you're talking about the judges of the court you're before, especially an appellate court where you have rotating 3-judge panels like U.S. Courts of Appeals. But I'm also wondering, Sam, I wonder if this is something where the Seventh Circuit itself is especially cognizant of it, or it may be especially nervous about it. And that's because for years and years and years, with Posner and Easterbrook, and still Easterbrook, no longer Posner, on that court, whenever, I mean, we were basically taught this in law school, whenever you cited a Seventh Circuit opinion and one of those two was the author, you would do parenthesis Posner or parenthesis Easterbrook, more so Posner because he was also this, just huge prolific legal scholar. But you would do that all the time. So I wonder in the Seventh Circuit over the decades, advocates have like Posner Easterbrook all the time, and other judges are just enough already. It's the Seventh Circuit, another judge signed on to that opinion, and so just please give us, give us some humanity here instead of only thinking of those two judges. Maybe that's overreading it, but I wonder if they're a little bit more nervous about it there than they would be, wherever else.
Yes, that's possible. And I should say, like, this very well may be a thing in other circuits too. It just happened to kind of get on my radar by happenstance for the Seventh. And I think the Supreme Court still kind of does that name drop thing.
Well, I've heard advocates at SCOTUS say, as you, Justice Kagan, said in this case from 5 years ago or whatever it is. And, they don't say, well, the whole court, that was a majority opinion and it's not just me. They'll, take the question and move on.
Yeah,
so
maybe.
Well, that's about oral arguments. I thought we would close with a new segment on this show, and that is to see what our dear guests are reading right now. Because you do read, or it doesn't have to be reading. It could be something you've seen recently, but something made you think, something you'd like to share with our audience.
Sam, what do you think about?
So I think Well, as I'm working through this in real time, I'm embarrassed. I think all three of them have to do with ships, and I don't want to leave your listeners
Oh,
with the
this
idea
is
that
great.
all I do is watch
That's
or
good.
read things about ships. It's just
Let's talk about Master and Commander.
so one of the books is a Master and Commander book, or the Aubrey-Maturin series, as
Excellent.
we enthusiasts refer to it as. The Nutmeg of Consolation, great book. They're kind of like my comfort book. So when I have to travel for work, I normally just kind of like pick up a random Aubrey-Maturin book and throw it in my bag, because I know that if I pull it out in a hotel, I'll just be, I'll read a few pages and fall asleep. So that's one of them, John.
Isn't that so? I heard recently when you've read all of those books, it's like you've circumnavigated. Is what it's called.
That's what the cool kids call it, Anthony. Yes. So I will admit to having deliberately never completed the circumnavigation. I've read up to about book 19. I think there's 20 or 20 and a half books. But I've deliberately never read the last one so that I always will have something to look forward to. And I just kind of like, start at the beginning or just pick one up in the middle and stuff like that.
That's so cute.
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. The other book, which I started yesterday, is about the Barbary pirates and Thomas Jefferson, which is kind of interesting. And the TV series, or the season, which I recently finished watching, is called The Terror on Netflix, which is an anthology series. The first season is about Franklin's expedition to try to find the Northwest Passage on the ship, the Erebus, and the other ship was called the Terror. And it's a kind of, I won't spoil it, but it's a harrowing and very enjoyable show, particularly for people who like historical naval stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I will share with you something that I'm reading, which I'll be reading, I'm sure, until I'm old and gray. Which is as Anthony knows, because I've told him about this, because I've been reading it forever, Robert Toombs' The English and Their History, which is like a massive tome about, you guessed it, the English and their history. It's probably the most like complete 1-volume book about the history of England that I've come across, which is why I got it in the first place. It is lovely. It starts with like the earliest peoples in the area.
Well, does it start? I was going to say, does it start with the English, or is it pre-English?
Oh, it's pre-English. Yeah. So it explains how we get to the Anglican, which I think my understanding of that etymology, which may be wrong, but I think this is what I picked up from the book, is that there were pre-English, sorry. There were native, I believe they were slaves taken back to Rome. And I think it might have been, or they came willingly. Either way, they ended up in Rome. And I think one of the popes said that they looked angelic. That is the story I have heard.
Well, yeah, it was that they were Angles, because the people really was the Angles, one of those peoples. And then he said you should call them angels. And they started,
it's a clever pun.
Yeah, and it kind of took off after that. But yeah, Anglo-Saxons, all that. But he also talks about the Britons, sounds like.
Right. The Britons. Yeah. So he does a great job of kind of going from, I think, soup to nuts on like the whole history. The first part of the book is pretty slow because it's kind of getting the foundation. And the one thing that I've taken away from the book so far is like how much something like geography is just so determinative in a lot of the history. But it's a fantastic book if you're interested in the history of England. It's awesome. I am only probably up to like 13 or 1400, and I have most of the book left. But it is phenomenal. And then I just recently watched Miyazaki's Boy and the Heron. I don't know if you're familiar with Miyazaki films. Yeah, he does the voice. No, actually, Robert Pattinson does some voicing in. I don't know if you've seen any of the Miyazaki films. I feel like they are significantly more popular with my generation, which I guess I'm one of the last years of millennial. So just to give some context.
Well, you're making some rude assumptions about Anthony.
Sorry. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so Miyazaki has made like a bunch of famous films, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, stuff like that, but they're animated. But they are like some of the most watched films in Japan. They're often quite profound and beautiful. But I find that at least in the United States, I think it's kind of millennials who probably like took to it. And so we're the ones enjoying it, and so we have to spread the gospel. So that's what I'm doing. So go watch Boy with the Heron. It's really good. It's set in the midst of World War II in Japan, and a boy moves to the countryside with his father and his new stepmother. And all the films are very, very like coming of age, kind of like magical. They're good. They're really good.
So to verify your stereotyping of my generation, Gen X.
Yep, age discrimination.
Yeah, I did not recognize the artist you were talking about, but I think I have seen one or two of those films because it sounds familiar. Japanese animation and coming of age and all that. So that was a few. I think it was showing it to our kids probably a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So I am reading right now a tome that is taking a while, but it's worth it, and it's the latest big book by David Hackett Fisher, who I think I have on various IJ Airways implored people to read before. But the book that just came out a couple years ago is African Founders. And so it's basically the history of Africans coming to North America, the United States, British North America, but there's a little bit of like, the New Orleans and the French and that kind of thing. But he wrote the book from I think it's the late 80s, early 1990s that is all about called Albion Seed, which is about the British coming to the United States and the like four kind of founding cultures in the United States that like Virginia, Massachusetts, the Quakers in Pennsylvania, and then the Scots-Irish. And so like those four founder effects had a lot of influence later on U.S. history. And so now he's doing the same thing for people from Africa, almost all of which came here enslaved. And anyway, there's all kinds of stuff. He traveled to Africa to do some of the research, and there's what were like it starts in New England and what were blacks doing in New England in the 1600s, and then goes from there. And then he does the Chesapeake, and anyway, really fascinating and also very long. So it's taking a while, but comprehensive. So I recommend both those books, kind of bookends of his writing career, it seems.
What about your TV, Anthony?
My TV, a lot of sports. Okay. Our 11-year-old son basically is, whenever he's allowed TV, he's lots of sports on, and a lot of sports ball in our house. That is why my wife doesn't watch a lot of TV these days, because it's usually just sports ball. I mean, I enjoy it, but like baseball playoffs these days, that kind of thing. It's pretty sophisticated around our family. So, but this has been a sophisticated conversation. I hope you listeners have enjoyed the weeds. If any of you are still there, I thank you for trotting through. Hopefully you didn't pick up too many ticks, something you always have to worry about where I live when we're walking through weeds. But I think the ticks, are worth the ride. And so appreciate everyone coming on. Appreciate John and Sam for joining me today. And, that's just like your unpublished opinion, man.
I'm gonna do like a gentleman, go and get some high.